Chapter 42. We were woken by someone knocking on the door, then half opening it. Sunlight slashed through. He withdrew when he saw we were still in the bunks. I looked at my watch. It was 10 o'clock. I pulled on my clothes and went out. A shepherd. Somewhere in the distance I could hear the bells of his flock. He struck back with his crook the two enormous dogs that bared their teeth at me, and produced from the pockets of his greatcoat a cheese wrapped in sorrel leaves, which he had brought for our breakfast. After a few minutes, Allison came out, tucking her shirt into her jeans, and screwing up her eyes against the sun. We shared what was left of the rusks and the oranges with the shepherd, used up the last of the film. I was glad he was there. I could see, as clear as printed words in Allison's eyes, that she thought we had crossed back into the old relationship. She had broken the ice, but it was for me to jump into the water. The shepherd stood up, shook hands, and strode off with his two savage dogs and left us alone. Allison stretched back in the sun across the great slab of rock we had used as a table. It was a much less windy day. April warm, a dazzling blue sky. The sheep bells sounded in the distance, and some bird like a lark sang high up the slope above us. I wish we could stay here forever. I've got to get the car back. Just wishing, she looked at me. Come and sit here. She patted the rock by her side. Her gray eyes stared up at me, at their most candid. Do you forgive me? I bent and kissed her cheek, and she put her arms round me so that I lay half across her, and we had a whispered conversation, mouths to each other's left ears. Say you wanted to. I wanted to. Say you love me a little still. I love you a little still. She pinched my back. A lot still. And you'll get better. And never go with those nasty women again? Never. It's silly when you can have it for free, with love. I know. I was staring at the ends of her hair against the rock, an inch or two from my eyes, and trying to bring myself to the point of confession, but it seemed like treading on a flower because one can't be bothered to step aside. I pushed up, but she held me by the shoulders so that I had to stare down at her. I sustained her look, its honesty, for a moment. Then I turned and sat with my back to her. What's wrong? Nothing. I just wondered what malicious God made a nice kid like you see anything in his shit like me. That reminds me, a crossword clue. I saw it months ago. Ready? I nodded. She's all mixed up, but the better part of Nicholas. 6 letters. I worked it out and smiled at her. Did the clue end in a full stop or a question mark? It ended in my crying, as usual, and a bird above us sang in the silence. We set off down. As we came lower, it grew warmer and warmer. Summer rose to meet us. Allison led the way, and so she could rarely see my face. I tried to sort out my feelings about her. It irritated me still that she put so much reliance on the body thing, the shared orgasm. Her mistaking that for love, her not seeing that love was something other, the mystery of withdrawal, reserve, walking away through the trees, turning the mouth away at the last moment. On Parnassus of all mountains, it occurred to me, her unsubtlety, her inability to hide behind metaphor, ought to offend me, to bore me as uncomplex poetry normally bored me. And yet in some way, I couldn't define she had always had, this secret trick of slipping through all the obstacles I put between us. As if she were really my sister, had access to unfair pressures and could always evoke deep similarities to annul. or to make seem irrelevant the differences in taste or feeling. She began to talk about being an air hostess, about herself. Oh, Jesus, excitement. That lasts a couple of duties. New faces, new cities, new romances with handsome pilots. Most of the pilots think we're part of the aircrew amenities, just queuing up to be blessed by their miserable old Battle of Britain cocks. I laughed. Nico, it's not funny. It destroys you. That bloody tin pipe, and all that freedom, that space outside. Sometimes I just want to pull the safety handle and be sucked out. Just falling. A minute of wonderful, lovely, passengerless falling. You're not serious. More serious than you think. We call it charm depression, when you get so penny in the slot charming that you stop being human anymore. It's like sometimes we're so busy after takeoff we don't realize how far the plane's climbed, and you look out and it's a shock. It's like that. You suddenly realize how far you are from what you really are, or you were, or something. I don't explain it well. Yes, you do, very well. You begin to feel you don't belong anywhere anymore. You know, as if I didn't have enough problems that way already. I mean, England's impossible. It becomes more on y soit qui, smelly pants every day. It's a graveyard. And Australia. God, how I hate my country. The meanest, the stupidest, blindest. She gave up. We walked on a way, then she said, It's just I haven't roots anywhere anymore. I don't belong anywhere. They're all places I fly to or from or over. I just have people I like or love. They're the only homeland I have left. She threw a look back, a shy one, as if she had been saving up this truth about herself, this rootlessness, homelandlessness, which she knew was also a truth about me. At least we've got rid of a lot of useless illusions as well. Clever us. She fell silent, and I swallowed her reproach. In spite of her superficial independence, her fundamental need was to cling. All her life was an attempt to disprove it, and so proved it. She was like a sea anemone, had only to be touched to adhere to what touched her. She stopped. We both noticed it at the same time. Below us, to our right, the sound of water, a rush of water. I'd love to bathe my feet. Could we get down? We struck off the path through the trees, and after a while came on a faint trail. It led us down, and finally out into a clearing. At one end was a waterfall some 10 feet or so high. A pool of limpid water had formed beneath it. The clearing was dense with flowers and butterflies, a tiny trough of green gold luxuriance after the dark forest we had been walking through. At the upper edge of the clearing there was a little cliff with a shallow cave, outside which some shepherd had pleached an arbor of fir branches. There were sheep droppings on the floor, but they were old. No one could have been there since summer began. Let's have a swim. It'll be like ice. Yeah. She pulled her shirt over her head and unhooked her bra, grinning at me in the flecked shadow of the arbor. The place is probably alive with snakes, like Eden. She stepped out of her jeans and her white pants. Then she reached up and snapped a dead cone off one of the arbor branches and held it out to me. I watched her run nakedly through the long grass to the pool, try the water, groan. Then she waded forwards and swanned in with a scream. The water was jade green, melted snow, and it made my heart jolt with shock when I plunged beside her. And yet it was beautiful. The shadow of the trees, the sunlight on the glade, the white roar of the little fall, the iciness, the solitude, the laughing, the nakedness, moments one knows only death will obliterate. Sitting in the grass beside the arbor, We let the sun and the small breeze dry us and ate the last of the chocolate. Then Allison lay on her back, her arms thrown out, her legs a little open, abandoned to the sun. And I knew, to me, for a time I lay like her, with my eyes closed. Then she said, "I'm Queen of the May." She was sitting up, turned to me, propped on one arm. She had woven a rough crown out of the ox eyes and wild pinks that grew in the grass around us. It sat lopsidedly on her uncombed hair, and she wore a smile of touching innocence. She did not know it, but it was at first for me an intensely literary moment. I could place it exactly. England's Helicon. I had forgotten that there are metaphors and metaphors, and that the greatest lyrics are very rarely anything but direct and unmetaphysical. Suddenly she was like such a poem, and I felt a passionate wave of desire for her. It was not only lust, not only because she looked, as she did in her periodic fashion, disturbingly pretty, small-breasted, small-waisted, leaning on one hand, dimpled, then grave, a child of 16, not a girl of 24, just because I was seeing through all the ugly, the unpoetic accretions of modern life to the naked real self of her, a vision of her as naked in that way as she was in body. Eve glimpsed again through 10,000 generations. It rushed on me. It was quite simple. I did love her. I wanted to keep her, and I wanted to keep or to find Julie. It wasn't that I wanted one more than the other. I wanted both. I had to have both. There was no emotional dishonesty in it. The only dishonesty was in my feeling dishonest, concealing. It was love that finally drove me to confess, not cruelty, not a wish to be free, to be callous and clear, but simply love. I think in those few long moments that Allison saw that. She must have seen something torn and sad in my face, because she said, very gently, "What's wrong?" "I haven't had syphilis. It's all a lie." She gave me an intense look, then sank back on the grass. "Oh, Nicholas, I want to tell you. Not now, please, not now. Whatever's happened, come and make love to me." And we did make love, not sex, but love, though sex would have been far wiser. Lying beside her, I began to describe what had happened at Berani. The ancient Greeks said that if one slept a night on Parnassus, either one became inspired or one went mad. And there was no doubt which happened to me. Even as I spoke, I knew it would have been better to say nothing, to have made something up. But love, that need to be naked, I had chosen the worst of all possible moments, to be honest. And like most people who have spent much of their adult life being emotionally dishonest, I overcalculated the sympathy a final being honest would bring. But love, that need to be understood, and Parnassus was also to blame for being so Greek, a place that made anything but the truth a mind-sore. Of course, she wanted first to know the reason for the bizarre pretext I had hit on, but I wanted her to understand the strangeness of Berani before I mentioned its deepest attraction. I didn't deliberately hide anything else about Conchis, but I still left great gaps. It's not that I believe any of these things in the way he tries to make me believe them, but even there, since he hypnotized me, I don't absolutely know. It's simply that when I'm with him, I feel he does have access to some kind of power, not a cult. I can't explain, but it must be all faked. All right, but why me? How did he know I would go there? I'm nothing to him. He obviously doesn't even think very much of me as a person. He's always laughing at me. I still don't understand. But then she did. She looked at me. There's someone else there. Allison, for God's sake, try to understand. Listen. I'm listening. but her face was averted. So at last I told her. I made it out to be an asexual thing, a fascination of the mind. But she attracts you the other way. Allie, I can't tell you how much I've hated myself this weekend, and tried to tell you everything a dozen times before. I don't want to be attracted by her in any way. A month, 3 weeks ago, I couldn't have believed it. I still don't know what it is about her. Honestly, I only know I'm haunted, possessed by everything over there, not just her. Something so strange is going on, and I'm involved. She looked unimpressed. I've got to go back to the island because of the job. There are so many ways in which I'm not a free agent. But this girl, she was staring at the ground, picking seeds off grass heads. She's irrelevant, really, just a very small part of it. Then why all the performance? You can't understand. I'm being pulled in too. Is she pretty? If I still didn't care like hell for you deep down, it would all have been so easy. Is she pretty? Yes. Very pretty. I said nothing. She buried her face in her arms. I stroked her warm shoulder. She's totally unlike you, unlike any modern girl. I can't explain. She turned her head away. Allison. I must seem just... But she didn't finish. Now you're being ridiculous. Am I? There was a tense silence. Look, I'm trying desperately, for once in my miserable life, to be honest. I have no excuses. If I met this girl tomorrow, okay, I could say, I love Allison. Allison loves me. Nothing doing. But I met her a fortnight ago, and I've got to meet her again. And you don't love Allison. She stared away. Or you love me till you see a better bit of tail? Don't be crude. I am crude. I think crude. I talk crude. I am crude. She knelt, took a breath. So what now? I curtsy and withdraw? I wish to God I wasn't so complicated. Complicated, she snorted. Selfish. That's better. We were silent. 2 coupled yellow butterflies flitted heavily, saggingly past. All I wanted was that you should know what I am. I know what you are. If you did, you'd have cut me out right at the beginning. I still know what you are. And her cold gray eyes went through me till I had to look down. She stood up and went to wash. It was hopeless. I couldn't manage it. I couldn't explain, and she could never understand. I put my clothes on and turned my back while she dressed in silence. When she was ready, she said, Don't for God's sake say any more. I can't bear it. We got to Arakova about 5 and set off to drive back to Athens. I twice tried to discuss everything again with her, but she wouldn't allow it. We had said all that could be said, and she sat brooding, wordless, all the way. We came over the pass at Daphne at about 8:30, with the last light over the pink and amber city, the first neon signs round Syntagma and Almonia like distant jewels. I thought of where we had been that time the night before, and glanced at Allison. She was putting on lipstick. Perhaps, after all, there was a solution. To get her back into the hotel, make love to her, prove to her through the loins that I did love her, and why not? Let her see that I might be worth suffering, just as I was and always would be. I began to talk a little, casually, about Athens, but her answers were so uninterested, so curt, that it sounded as ridiculous as it was, and I felt silent. The pink turned to violet, and soon it was night. We arrived at the hotel in the Piraeus. I had reserved the same rooms. Allison went up while I took the car round to the garage. On the way back I saw a flower seller, and bought a dozen carnations from him. I went straight to her room and knocked on the door. I had to knock 3 times before she unlocked it. She had been crying. I brought you some flowers. I don't want your bloody flowers. Look, Allison, it's not the end of the world. Just the end of the affair. I broke the silence. Aren't you going to let me in? Why the hell should I? She stood holding the door half shut, the room in darkness behind her. Her face was terrible, puffed and unforgiving, nakedly hurt. Just let me come in and talk to you. No. Please, go away. I pushed in past her and closed the door. She stood against the wall staring at me. Light came up from the street, and I could see her eyes. I offered the flowers. She snatched them from my hand, went to the window and hurled them, pink heads, green stems, out into the night, remained there with her back to me. This experience, it's like being halfway through a book. I just throw it in the dustbin. So you throw me instead. I went behind her to try to put my hands on her shoulders, but she jerked angrily away. Fuck off. Just fuck off. I sat on the bed and lit a cigarette. Down in the street, monotonous Macedonian folk music skirled from some cafe loudspeaker. But we sat and stood in a strange cocoon of remoteness from even the nearest outside things. I came to Athens knowing I ought not to meet you. I did my damnedest that first evening and yesterday to prove myself that I don't have any special feeling for you anymore, but it didn't work. That's why I talked so ineptly, so at the wrong time. She gave no sign of listening. I produced my trump. Talk when I could have kept quiet. Could still be deceiving you. I'm not the one who's deceived. Look. And what the hell does special feeling mean? I was silent. Christ, you're not just afraid of the thing, love. You're even afraid of using the word now. I don't know what love is. She spun round. Well, let me tell you, love isn't only what I said it was in that letter, not turning back to look. Love is pretending to go to work, but going to Victoria to give you one last surprise, one last kiss, one last... It doesn't matter if I saw you buying magazines. That morning I couldn't have laughed with anyone in the world, and yet you laughed. You fucking well stood with the porter and laughed about something. That's when I found out what love was. Seeing the one person you want to live with happy to have escaped from you. But why didn't you? You know what I did? I crept away and spent the whole god-awful day curled up on our bed. Not because I loved you, because I was so mad with rage and shame that I loved you. I wasn't to know. She turned away. I wasn't to know. Christ. Violence hung in the air like static electricity. Another thing. You think love is sex. Let me tell you something. If I'd wanted you just for that, I'd have let you straight after the first night. My apologies. She looked at me, took a breath, gave a bitter little smile. Oh, God, now he's hurt. I'm trying to tell you that I loved you, not for your blasted prick. She stared back out into the night. Of course you're all right in bed, but you're not the... Silence. Best you've had? If that was what mattered, she came to the end of the bed and leaned against it, looking down at me. I think you're so blind you probably don't even know you don't love me. You don't even know you're a filthy, selfish bastard who can't like being impotent, can't ever think of anything except number one. Because nothing can hurt you, Nico, deep down where it counts. You've built your life so that nothing can ever reach you. So whatever you do, you can say, I couldn't help it. You can't lose. You can always have your next adventure, your next bloody affair. You always twist. Holy Jesus, don't you talk of twisting. You can't even tell a simple fact straight. I looked round at her. Meaning? All that mystery balls. You think I fall for that? There's some girl on your island and you want to lay her, that's all. But of course that's nasty. That's crude. So you tart it up, as usual. Tart it up so it makes you seem the innocent one, the great intellectual who must have his experience. Always both ways. Always cake and eat it. Always. I swear. But her impatient jerk away silenced me. She walked up and down the room. I tried another excuse. Because I don't want to marry you, or anyone, it doesn't mean I don't love you. That reminds me, that child. You thought I didn't notice. The little girl with the boil, it made you furious. Allison showing how good she is with kids, doing the mother act. And shall I tell you something? I was doing the mother act. Just for a moment when she smiled, I did think that. I did think how I'd like to have your children. And have my arm round them, and have you near me. Isn't that terrible? I have this filthy, disgusting, stinking taste thing called love. God, syphilis is nice compared to love. And I'm so depraved, so colonial, so degenerate that I actually dare show you. Allison. She took her shuddery breath, near tears. I realized as soon as we met on Friday, for you I'll always be Allison who slept around, that Australian girl who had an abortion, the human boomerang. Throw her away and she'll always come back for another weekend of cheap knock. That's a long way below the belt. She lit a cigarette. I went and stood by the window, and she spoke at my back across the bed and the room from the door. All that time, last autumn, I didn't realize then. I didn't realize you can get softer. I thought you went on getting harder. God only knows why I felt closer to you than I felt to any other man. God only knows why, in spite of all your smart-aleck pommy ways, your bloody class mania. So I never really got over your going. I tried Pete. I tried another man, but it didn't work. Always this stupid, pathetic little dream. Then one day you'd write, so I went mad trying to organize these 3 days, bidding everything on them, even though I could see, God, how I could see you were just bored. That's not true. I wasn't bored. Thinking about this bit on Fraxos. I missed you, too, hellishly, those first months. Suddenly, she switched the lights on. Turn round and look at me. I did. She was standing by the door, still in her blue jeans and the dark blue shirt, her face a gray and white mask. I've saved some money, and you can't be exactly broke. If you say the word, I'll walk out of my job tomorrow. I'll come on your island and live with you. I said a cottage in Ireland, but I'll take a cottage on Fraxos. You can have that, the dreadful responsibility of having to live with someone who loves you. It was vile, but my one reaction when she said a cottage on Fraxos was a profound relief that I hadn't told her of Conscience's offer. Or, you can say no. An ultimatum. No sliding, yes or no. Allison, if yes or no. You can't decide these things. Her voice sharpened to pitch. Yes or no. I stared at her. She gave a tiny humorless twist of her lips, and she answered for me. No. Only because she ran straight to the door and opened it. I felt angry, trapped into this ridiculous either-or choice, this brutal demand for real commitment. I went round the bed toward her, yanked the door away from her grip, and slammed it shut again, then caught her and tried to kiss her, reaching past her at the same time to flick off the light. The room was plunged into darkness again, but she struggled wildly, jerking her head from side to side. I pulled her back toward the bed and fell with her across it, making it roll and knock both lamp and ashtray off the bedside table. I thought she would give in. She must give in, but suddenly she screamed, so loud that it must have pierced all through the hotel and echoed over on the other side of the port. "Let me go!" I sat back a little and she hit me with her clubbed fist. I caught her wrists. "For God's sake." "I hate you." "Keep quiet." I forced her on her side. Someone in the next room banged on the wall. Another nerve-splitting scream. "I hate you." I slapped the side of her face. She began to sob violently, twisted sideways against the bed end. Fragments of words howled at me between gasps for air and tears. "Leave me alone, you shit, you fucking selfish..." Explosion of sobs. Her shoulders racked. I stood and went to the window. She began to bang the bed rail with her fists, as if she was beyond words. I hated her then, her lack of control, her hysteria. I remembered that there was a bottle of scotch downstairs in my room. She had brought it for me as a present, the first day. "Look, I'm going to get you a drink. Now stop wailing." I hovered over her. She took no notice, went on beating the bed rail. I got to the door, hesitated, looked back, then went out. 3 Greeks, a man and woman and an elder man, were standing 2 open doors away, staring at me as if I were a murderer. I went downstairs, opened the bottle, swallowed a stiff shot straight out of it, then went back. The door was locked. The 3 spectators continued to stare, watched me try it, knock, try it again, knock, then call her name. The older man came up to me. "Was anything wrong?" I grimaced and muttered, "The heat." He repeated it unnecessarily back to the other 2. "Ah, the heat." "And the woman—" "The heat," said the woman, as if that explained everything. They did not move. I tried once more, called her name through the wooden panels. I could hear nothing. I shrugged for the benefit of the Greeks and went back downstairs. 10 minutes later I returned. I returned 4 or 5 times more during the next hour, and always the door, to my secret relief, was shut. I had asked to be and was woken at 8, and I dressed at once and went to her room. I knocked. No answer. When I tried the handle, the door opened. The bed had been slept in, but Allison and all her belongings were gone. I ran straight down to the reception desk. A rabbity old man with spectacles, the father of the proprietor, sat behind it. He'd been in America and spoke English quite well. "You know that girl I was with last night? Has she gone out this morning?" "Oh, yeah, she went out." "When?" He looked up at the clock. "About 1 hour since. She left this. She said give it you when you came down." An envelope, my scrawled name, N. Orth. "She didn't say where she was going?" "Just paid her check and went." I knew by the way he was watching me that he had heard, or heard about, the screaming the evening before. "But I said I'd pay." I said I told her. Damn. As I turned to go, he said, "Hey, you know what they say in the States? Always plenty more fish in the sea. Know that one? Plenty more fish in the sea." I went back to my room and opened her letter. It was a scrawl, a last-moment decision not to go in silence. "Think what it would be like if you got back to your island and there was no old man, no girl anymore, no mysterious fun and games, the whole place locked up forever. It's finished, finished, finished." About 10, I telephoned the airport. Allison had not returned and was not due to return until her flight to London at 5 that afternoon. I tried again at 11:30, just before the boat sailed. The same answer. As the ship, which was filled with returning boys, drew out from the quay. I scanned the crowds of parents and relations and idlers. I had some idea that she was there among them, watching. But if she was invisible. The ugly industrial seafront of the Piraeus receded, and the boat headed south for the svelte blue peak of Aegina. I went to the bar and ordered a large ouzo. I drank a mouthful neat and made a sort of bitter inner toast. I had chosen my own way, the difficult, hazardous, poetic way, all on one number, though even then I heard Allison bitterly reverse those last two words. Someone slipped onto the stool beside me. It was Demetriades. He clapped his hands for the barman. "Buy me a drink, you perverted Englishman, and I will tell you how I spent a most amusing weekend."